Hello, good morning students, welcome. Here we are with a new video of class 8 or geography portion. In SST geography. Students, today we are taking chapter 3 natural vegetation and wildlife. If you see the Hindi of these chapters, that is Prakritik, Vanaspati, that means trees and plants, and wild or Vanajeevan. The animals will be in forest. So students, as we know that this earth is having a kind of flora and fauna in that different types of animals, birds and insects and so on, living beings are living in our earth biosphere. What is biosphere, students? If you see, if there is our earth, so there is a space or there is a region nearby the earth is known as biosphere. From where up to the oxygen is exist and the gravitation force of earth is there. So that is biosphere. So in biosphere, trees, plants, animals, human beings, insects and different types of living organisms are being lived. So students, today our topic is natural vegetation and wildlife, and which vegetation which is naturally grown and the wildlife which is naturally occurred. This is not any kind of human existence or help in that, it is just natural phenomena and incident. So students, in this chapter we will be able to describe the meaning and importance of natural vegetation and wildlife. In this chapter we will be able to know that what is natural vegetation and what is wildlife, analyze the factors that influence the natural vegetation and wildlife of a regime, and what are the factors by which the natural vegetation and wildlife of a regime can be affected or can be changed. Then we discuss the different types of natural vegetation and life, and we will also discuss the different type of vegetation and wildlife and identify the different types of natural vegetation and wildlife found in India, and with international phenomena we will also read about the India's natural vegetation and wildlife. Explain the ways of conservation of natural vegetation and wildlife in India. So what is conservation, student? Sanrakshan. How can we conserve, how can we give security to wildlife and natural vegetation? Students, in your course book of geography, class 8 SST, page number 13, and topic is what is natural vegetation and wildlife. I read. Life on the earth exists in the biosphere, due to which it is known as the zone of life. What I said, this spherical part after earth, which is having oxygen, which is having life. So this area and this regime, this sphere is known as biosphere. And in this, different kind of animals and birds are living there, and species, living organisms are living there. So that is why we know biosphere as a zone of life. Zone of life. Plants and animals are two of the main components of the biosphere, and if we talk about the components of this biosphere, so we have to know plants and animals are basic components of this biosphere because they lived in this, and by their presence and their regime and range we can understand the biosphere. Then students, we see the plants and animals in this zone not only interact with each other and depend on one another, but they also interact with the physical environment. So first we have to understand, as we know in plants photosynthesis occurs, as we know plant is the main source, plants and trees are the main source of oxygen division and emission. And student, as we know all living beings are depend on oxygen. So as we know, if there is more plant and trees, there are more plant and trees in any regime, there would be good atmosphere to live. So that is the impact of trees and plants in any regime, and how the trees and plants and that wildlife or natural life, natural vegetation is connected with the area of nearby, and how the impacts of that is on that region or area. Then students, the area where such interaction between the organism and the environment take place is known as ecosystem. Very important word, ecosystem. What is ecosystem, students? The area where such interaction between the organism and the environment. So, if there is, living organism, all type of organism, all animals, all insects, birds, etc., and this is natural vegetation. In that, all plants and trees are there. All plants and trees are there. So when these living organisms and this natural vegetation and plants and trees meet each other at a place, at a regime, is known as ecosystem. In ecosystem, if there would be animals, birds, species, living organisms, and at the same time natural vegetation, plants and trees, by that rain will occur, by that nearby area will be nurtured and agriculture can be followed and practiced. At the same time, oxygen availability of oxygen will be there if there are plants and trees, and at the same time, if there is natural wildlife, if human beings are there, can be survived in that system. So any living organism, any living beings can be survived in a system, and what the system is needed, what the survival is needed is natural vegetation. Without natural vegetation, natural wildlife or any kind of living life cannot be possible, because as we know, plants and trees and natural vegetation are the main sources of oxygen, and oxygen is the base of life. So students, very important chapter is there, and ecosystem is a very important word. The interaction between the organism and the environment at the place, and which takes place is known as ecosystem. The plants of a particular regime that grow naturally are called natural vegetation. And in any area, in every area, there are some natural plants which are naturally grown, and these plants and trees are known as natural vegetation. A particular set of plants and animals that have adapted themselves to their environment is called biome, and in a particular natural vegetation it may be varied from different regime, and in this regime, if there is particular plant and trees, particular विशेष प्रकार के पौधे या पेड़, if there are types of particular plants are there in a different regime of or continent, so that area and that region of that particular plant is known as biome. For example, if there is Like if we talk about Sundarban Delta or Sundarban forest. So in there is trees of Sundar trees are there, and those trees is being morely grown on that places. So that area is known as Sundar trees biome. So every particular biome is identified by its plants and trees. So students, we have discussed about ecosystem, natural vegetation, and now biome. So biome is specialized for a tree or plants in a particular natural vegetation regime, and in that if there is any kind of particular plants and trees, so that biome is known at the name of that plants and trees. So wildlife refers to the various species of birds, fishes, reptiles, insects and other animals that live in natural habitat. So there is a word natural habitat, and the meaning of that is natural home of any animal, bird, plant or any other organism. So there would be a kind of natural habitat in that every kind of facilities to live easily. There would be trees and plants, there would be rain, there would be oxygen, there would be some wildlife and life cycle and life circle. So if there is all kind of possibilities to live easily or to survive easily for a natural living beings or a natural wildlife, so this is known as natural habitat. If I explain this by example, so if a bird wants to live in a kind of natural vegetation, so it has to be needed some shadows of trees, there should be water to drink, there should be some insects to eat to survive its life. So students, these facilities which are available for a kind of species or living beings or any living beings to live easy, what is making easy to live is known as natural habitat. If you see the meaning of habitat, that is घर, रहने की जगह. And if you see natural habitat, प्राकृतिक तौर पे रहने की जगह, naturally रहने की जगह. So the animals and birds are taking some natural places which are already naturally established, and the living standard of there and the life survival of there is easy because of that natural habitat. So wildlife basically lives in natural habitats, and that natural habitats consists and contains environmental phenomena and kind of atmosphere, biosphere, and in that the life of animals and all living beings would be easy to survive. So that is known as natural habitat, and in this natural habitat wildlife refers to various species of birds, fishes, reptiles, insects and other animals live in this natural habitat. So different kinds of animals and living organisms live in this natural habitat, and this in living of natural wildlife is known as wildlife, and there is a close relationship between the natural vegetation and wildlife of the regime. So because if there is a wildlife, they would be dependent on the vegetables and the grasses and the natural vegetation of nearby area, maybe plants or trees or fruits or any kind. So the wildlife that we know, the living life or animal life or any life of living organism is dependent on natural vegetation of that area, because plants and trees grow foods. By that the wildlife can really survive. At the same time, kind of rain, shadows are also given by trees and plants. Students, the type of wildlife existing in a particular regime is dependent upon the natural vegetation of that regime, and in their kind of natural vegetation, the wildlife of that area will be like that. Because like if we talk about a desert is also kind of natural vegetation. So there are some spines, plants are there, plants of a spine, thorns plant, and the living species of their camel and some snakes and some reptiles are like those who are not taking more water to live, survive. So the dependence of or the dependency of a natural wildlife is depend on the natural vegetation of that particular region or area. So students, natural vegetation acts as the provider of food and habitat to the wildlife of a region. So natural vegetation is place or it acts like it is providing living facility and food. तो रहना और खाना दोनों कौन देता है? नेचुरल वेजिटेशन टू अ वाइल्ड लाइफ, बिकॉज इफ देयर इज नेचुरल वेजिटेशन वाइल्ड लाइफ कैन बी सर्वाइव्ड, एंड नेचुरल वेजिटेशन एंड वाइल्ड लाइफ आर आल्सो नोन एज फ्लोरा एंड फौना. सो दिस नेचुरल वेजिटेशन is known as flora and natural wildlife is known as fauna. F-A-U-N-A. So if these two words are there, flora, so you have to understand natural vegetation, and fauna, that is natural wildlife respectively. The factors influencing the natural vegetation and wildlife of a place are landform, type of soil, altitude, temperature, sunlight and rainfall. So students, these are factors by which the wildlife of any region can be affected or natural vegetation can be affected, and in that we see place of landform, a place of our landform. So what is the landform of a place? Is there, watery landform? Is there desert landform? Is there hilly landform? Is there, all type of fertile soils are there, and by that, even an old landform is there, or mountainous landform. So these landforms are also responsible of different kind of natural vegetation and natural wildlife. And we see type of soil is also means here that if there is fertile soil, natural vegetation can be more, and if there is more natural vegetation, natural wildlife would be also more. And if we see altitude means height. What is the height of that region which is particularly located? It is also depend on their cool and summer. So the altitude is also responsible for natural vegetation and wildlife. And we see temperature. If there is a kind of range of temperature which is easy to survive, then natural wildlife and vegetation will grow. Then our sunlight, if there is sufficient sunlight, the photosynthesis will be there. So then the flora, that is natural vegetation, will be occurred more. And we see rainfall, and if there is sufficient and appropriate rainfall, the natural vegetation and wildlife will be easily survived. So students, today we started this chapter and introduced what is natural vegetation and what is natural wildlife, and how ecosystem is formed, how natural habitat is there, and what is wildlife refers to, and at the same time what are the impacts of different areas and regime, and landform, type of soil and altitude, temperature, sunlight and rainfall in different type of natural vegetation and natural wildlife. So students, in homework I have to write a small summary on natural wildlife, natural vegetation, ecosystem and biome, and natural habitats. These topics are in homework, and if there is query and question, you can ask on my number. So students, we have started this chapter. Further we read in next video. Till then students, have a nice day. Thank you.